If you have any of these 9 foods in your kitchen, take a close look at the price the next time you go to the supermarket, because they may not disappear through empty shelves. They disappear from the budgets of ordinary families first. Beef, coffee, rice, frozen vegetables, canned seafood, processed tomatoes, olive oil, chocolate, and honey are all still on the shelves today. But behind them are droughts, extreme weather, rising production costs, tightening global supplies, and changes that most shoppers only notice after the grocery bill has already gone up. In this video, we are going to look at 9 foods that could become more expensive, harder to find, or more unpredictable before June 2026. And the final item may surprise you the most, because it is not loud, it does not create panic, but it remains one of the most durable foods humanity has ever known. 9. Beef. 3 years ago, many American families could still buy ground beef for around $4 to $5 per pound. Today, in many areas, that number has passed $7, even moving close to $8 for the same type of product. Some popular steak cuts have risen even more sharply. This is not the kind of change you need to read an inflation report to notice. You just have to walk into the supermarket, stand in front of the meat counter, and look at the price signs. There is a saying many older Americans often repeat. You can tell the economy is changing when you walk into the meat section. No need to watch the news. No need to listen to experts argue on television. Just look at your own shopping cart. And right now, the meat counter is telling a very uncomfortable story. But that is not the biggest problem. The real shock is not on the price tag. It is in what is happening behind the supply. The U.S. cattle herd is now at its lowest level in about 75 years. Think about that for a second. We are talking about one of the largest beef-producing countries in the world, an industry that has fed generations of Americans. And yet the number of cattle today is lower than at almost any point in many decades. That did not happen overnight. Years of drought in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and other major cattle states have put heavy pressure on ranchers. Pastures have declined. Feed has become more expensive. Fuel has become more expensive. Labor has become more expensive. When all of those pressures appear at the same time, many ranches have no choice but to shrink their herds. But this is the part that worries many experts the most. You can increase bread production fairly quickly. You can expand vegetable acreage in a single season. You can raise production of many foods within a few months. But you cannot create a mature cattle herd in just a few months. A calf born today takes years before it can become real supply for the market. That is why rebuilding the cattle herd is not a story for this summer or next year. It is a story that takes years. And that is also why the USDA and many industry experts continue to forecast that beef supplies will remain tight in the period ahead. This is exactly what makes beef different from many other items on this list. We are not just talking about a temporary price increase. We are talking about a supply base that takes years to recover, while demand remains strong. When supply falls but demand is still there, pressure on prices rarely disappears quickly. And this is the part almost every American family can feel. Not in the newspapers, not in economic reports, but right in the shopping cart every week. Many families buy smaller packages. Some wait for sales. Some switch from steak to ground beef. Some cut back on the number of times they eat beef during the week. That is how a supply crisis quietly walks into real life. What is worth noticing is that beef is not just a familiar food. For many people over 50, it is one of the densest protein sources for maintaining muscle, strength, and energy. It provides iron, zinc, and vitamin B12, nutrients the body should not take lightly as it gets older. When beef becomes more expensive, the issue is not only that dinner becomes less appealing. The issue is that many families begin having to rethink the protein source they once bought so naturally. That is why experienced preppers do not necessarily rush out to buy huge amounts of beef. They take advantage of major sales. They divide portions. They freeze it properly. They add longer-lasting protein sources like jerky or canned beef. Not because they think beef will disappear from America, but because they understand a very simple principle. Prices often rise before most people realize supply is under pressure. Beef does not disappear from America overnight. It disappears from the budgets of ordinary families first. And if beef shows what happens when an industry takes years to recover, the next item is facing a completely different problem. A drink that millions of Americans start every morning with, but whose global supply is being increasingly squeezed by extreme weather. 8. Coffee. Almost 100% of the coffee Americans drink every day is imported. Not half. Not most of it. Almost all of it. That means every morning cup of coffee on an American kitchen table depends on weather, harvests, transportation, and labor in regions thousands of miles away. And this is what makes the story more concerning than many people think. Coffee is not a luxury item people buy only once in a while. It is a daily habit. For many people over 50, coffee is not just caffeine. It is rhythm. It is a quiet morning. It is what helps them start the day in a familiar way. But when a product used every day depends almost entirely on imports, as soon as global supply tightens, American consumers feel it very quickly. Brazil, the world's largest coffee producer, has repeatedly faced drought, heat, and unstable weather. Many Arabica-growing regions have reported output below expectations. And it is not just Brazil. Other producing regions are also under pressure from flooding, extreme temperatures, labor shortages, and higher transportation costs. When all these factors appear together, prices do not rise because of one small reason. Prices rise because the whole system is being stretched. But this is the part that is hard to reverse. The United States cannot simply say, "Then let's grow more coffee at home." Unlike corn, soybeans, or beef, coffee needs a very specific climate. Most of U.S. territory is not suitable for large-scale coffee production. So when Brazil faces drought, when Colombia faces heavy rain, when Vietnam or other growing regions face unusual weather, American shoppers do not have a domestic replacement source large enough to fill the gap. That is why you begin seeing small but very real signs in the supermarket. Smaller bags of coffee, higher prices, specialty coffee lines rising sharply, some familiar brands going on sale less often than before. Sometimes, with the same amount of money, you can still buy coffee, but the amount of coffee in your hands is already smaller. This is exactly how a climate problem on the other side of the world quietly walks into the kitchen of an American family. What makes coffee more special than many other items is that demand is very hard to reduce sharply. People can cut back on a vacation. They can delay buying new clothes. They can eat out less often. But the morning cup of coffee is something many people still try to keep. In uncertain times, people often cling to small routines to feel that life is still normal. And that is exactly what keeps price pressure going. Supply is affected, but demand refuses to disappear. So smart preppers do not stockpile coffee as if the world is ending tomorrow. They simply do something very practical. Buy a moderate extra amount when the price is reasonable. Store it in a dry, cool, airtight place, and rotate it so it does not get stale. Not because coffee will disappear from America, but because coffee may disappear first from the comfortable price level many families used to know. If you had to choose one item you would not want to disappear from your kitchen next year, would coffee be on that list? And if coffee shows the risk of a daily habit depending almost entirely on imported supply, The next item is even quieter, an ingredient that appears in hundreds of products on supermarket shelves. But very few people notice it until its price starts climbing. 7. Jasmine and basmati rice. There is a bag of rice on the supermarket shelf that millions of families still walk past as if nothing is happening. But if you look closely at its price today, you may have to stop. A 20-pound bag of jasmine or basmati rice once cost only around $18 to $22 at many stores. Now, in quite a few places, that same bag has risen to around $30 to $40. And here is the part worth saying. This is not steak, not a luxury item, not something people buy for fun. This is rice, the thing many families have eaten their entire lives, bought out of habit, and almost never thought would become something they had to calculate. But the problem is not just that rice is more expensive. Jasmine is not just white rice. Basmati is not just a type of long-grain rice. They are tied to growing regions, rice varieties, climate, farming techniques, and food traditions shaped over many generations. With jasmine and basmati, the concern is not just a lack of rice. It is a lack of the right kind of rice that millions of families have eaten their entire lives. In recent years, the global rice market has been repeatedly stretched. Some Asian countries have adjusted or restricted exports to protect domestic supply. Extreme weather has caused many production regions to face drought, flooding, or saltwater intrusion. Meanwhile, in the United States, demand from Asian, Latin, Middle Eastern communities and many immigrant families remains very strong. For them, rice is the foundation of the meal. It is the pot of rice on the table. It is what goes with fish, meat, beans, vegetables, soup, curry, and hundreds of other family dishes. What makes the problem hard to reverse is that premium rice cannot be expanded in just a few months. You cannot simply say, grow more jasmine or grow more basmati anywhere and immediately have large production. These types of rice need suitable growing regions, stable water supplies, the right crop cycle, and export systems that have been operating for many years. That is why shoppers are starting to see very real signs. Familiar bags of rice are more expensive. Sales are less frequent. Sometimes they are out of stock, or people are forced to switch to another type. It sounds simple, but for many families, changing rice is not like changing a bottle of sauce. The rice grain changes, the aroma changes, the texture changes, and the entire meal changes with it. A properly stored bag of rice can last for years and pair easily with beans, canned fish, canned vegetables, meat, eggs, and almost every other protein source. But with jasmine and basmati, the value is not only in the calories, it is also in familiarity. Food does not only feed the body, sometimes it also feeds memory. What about you? What type of rice does your family use most right now? Jasmine, basmati, or another kind? 6. Canned seafood. In just a few years, the price of many popular types of canned fish has doubled. A can of sardines in olive oil that once cost only around $2 is now $4 or more in many places. For something once seen as cheap pantry protein, that is no longer a small increase. But the most dangerous part is not on the price label. It is in the ocean. You can open more factories. You can add more production shifts. But you cannot order the ocean to produce more fish. In recent years, sardines, mackerel, and tuna have all been under pressure from fishing quotas, changing ocean temperatures, and shifting spawning grounds. When migration routes change, when catches are restricted, supply cannot recover on the supermarket's schedule. That is why canned fish shelves often change very quietly. Today, there are still plenty of options. Next week, only a few brands are left. The kind packed in olive oil disappears first. Higher quality products go on sale less often. Then shoppers start realizing, with the same amount of money as before, they are buying less protein. What few people see is that canned fish is not just convenient food. One small can contain complete protein, omega-3, healthy fats, vitamin D, and with sardines, calcium from soft bones. A pantry full of rice, pasta, and beans can keep you full. But one can of fatty fish gives that meal far more nutritional depth. For people over 50, this is not a small matter. The body needs protein to maintain muscle. It needs healthy fats for the heart and brain. It needs vitamin D and minerals to maintain endurance. In a crisis, what weakens people is not only a lack of calories. Sometimes it is the lack of quiet nutrients the body used to get from fresh food. So smart preppers do not buy canned fish because it is flashy. They buy it because it does so many things in one small can. Ready to eat, no cooking required. Long shelf life, easy to pair with rice, pasta, bread, salad, or beans. When the power goes out, when meat prices rise, when fresh fish becomes too expensive, a can of fish on the shelf is no longer a side item. It is a real meal. The question is not whether canned fish will disappear completely. The question is whether, when you need the fastest, cleanest, most stable protein source, it will still be at the price level you used to know. Where you live, which one is rising most clearly? Sardines, mackerel, or tuna? 5. Processed tomatoes. If I told you that about 95% of America's processed tomatoes come from one single region in California, would you believe it? 95%. Not half. Not 2/3. Almost the entire system. And that is where the story begins. When many people see a can of tomato paste or a carton of tomato sauce, they only see a cheap product sitting on the shelf. But the food industry sees a bottleneck. Because when too much supply is concentrated in one place, every problem in that place spreads across the entire system. Years of drought, rising water costs, rising labor costs, rising energy costs, rising packaging costs. All of them are pressing down on California's processed tomato industry at the same time. What makes the problem harder to solve is that you cannot simply move the entire production system to another state in a few months. These fields, processing plants, and supply chains have been built over decades. That is why when production falls, companies often prioritize products with higher profit margins. And the small, cheap cans of tomato paste are often the first group affected. But this is the part that truly matters to people who prepare food seriously. Processed tomatoes are not a base food. They are a food-transforming food. A can of beans is still beans. A bowl of rice is still rice. A little pasta is still just pasta. But add tomatoes and everything changes. Chili appears. Soup appears. Pasta sauce appears. Stew appears. Pizza sauce appears. Hundreds of different meals begin with the same very humble ingredient. Many people think a food crisis means a lack of calories. In reality, what wears people down first is often monotony. Eating the same food for the first few days is not hard. But after a week, the story is completely different. That is why well-built pantries do not only contain foods that help you survive. They also contain ingredients that help you want to keep eating. And few foods do that more effectively than a few cans of processed tomatoes. Before we move into the final 3 spots, I want to ask you one question. If tomorrow you could keep only one ingredient to turn simple foods into dozens of different meals, would you choose processed tomatoes or something else? 4. Frozen vegetables. There is a question very few people ask themselves when opening the freezer. How many steps did a bag of frozen broccoli actually go through before it appeared in your kitchen? The answer often surprises many people. Frozen vegetables are not simply vegetables put into a freezer. They are a race against time. From the moment they are harvested in the field, many vegetables have to be washed, cut, processed, and frozen within just a few hours to preserve the best quality. Then they have to pass through cold processing plants, cold storage, refrigerated trucks, cold distribution centers, and finally the freezer section in the supermarket. Everything depends on electricity. Everything depends on time. Everything depends on no link in the chain failing. That is why just one major storm, one extreme heat wave, one power outage, or one transportation strike can begin to slow the entire supply chain. And this is what many Americans have started to notice. The vegetable they always buy suddenly disappears from the shelf for a few weeks. Then it comes back at a higher price. No big announcement, no shocking headline, just something that was always there suddenly no longer being there. What is interesting is that frozen vegetables are often seen as the second choice after fresh vegetables. But in many cases, they are actually the more stable choice. Fresh vegetables can spoil within days. Frozen vegetables can sit in the freezer for months. Fresh vegetables depend on when you go shopping. Frozen vegetables are already waiting when you need them. That is why, for many people over 50, the freezer section at the back of the supermarket is actually a small winter garden. A place that helps them maintain healthy eating habits, even when weather, prices, or supply become unpredictable. And here is the most important point. When people talk about food preparedness, most people think about survival. But experienced people usually think about health. Protein helps you survive. Carbohydrates give you energy. But green vegetables help the body continue functioning like a healthy body. That is the difference. Frozen vegetables are not emergency food. They are food that helps you avoid paying for your health later. That is why many families always keep a few extra bags in the freezer, not because of fear, but because they understand that maintaining a good habit is always easier than fixing a health problem after it appears. If you could keep only one frozen vegetable in your freezer all year, would you choose broccoli, peas, spinach, or something else? 3. Olive oil. There is a very frustrating kind of price increase. It does not hit you in the face immediately. It just makes you stand in front of the shelf for a few seconds longer. In 2022, many people could still walk into Costco, Walmart, or a familiar supermarket and buy a large bottle of olive oil for around $8 to $10. It was a very ordinary purchase. Put it in the cart, no need to think much. But today, that same kind of bottle of olive oil, especially good quality extra virgin olive oil, can reach $15, $18, even close to $20. This is the kind of price that makes you pick up the bottle, look at the label, then look again to make sure you did not read it wrong. Not too long ago, olive oil was simply an item sitting on the shelf. You bought a bottle, brought it home, used it for a few weeks or a few months, then bought another one. Nobody really thought much about it. But now, a familiar bottle of oil has become something many families have to calculate. The reason is far away from your shopping cart. Most of the world's olive oil comes from the Mediterranean region, especially Spain, Italy, Greece, and Portugal. These areas have endured years of prolonged drought, extreme heat, and increasingly unpredictable harvests. Olive trees can live for hundreds of years, but if heat hits at the exact time the trees are flowering or bearing fruit, production can still drop sharply. What keeps the market from feeling safe is that global olive oil supply has still not fully recovered. When supply has not returned to normal but consumers, restaurants, and the food industry still need olive oil, prices usually do not return to old levels quickly. That is why many people are starting to see familiar signs. Smaller bottles, higher prices, familiar brands appearing less often. But olive oil is not just cooking oil. It is fat. And fat is something many backup pantries are missing. Rice, beans, pasta, and oats can keep you full, but the body cannot function well long-term on carbohydrates alone. Vitamins A, D, E, and K all need fat to be absorbed effectively. For many people over 50, this matters even more. Fat makes meals easier to eat, keeps you full longer, and makes simple foods feel less dry. A plate of steamed vegetables, a bowl of pasta, a slice of bread, or a simple salad can completely change with just a little olive oil. It does not just add flavor, it makes the meal feel more complete. A food supply without fat is like a car with a good engine, but a fuel tank nearly empty. It may look complete, but when you need to go a long distance, you realize you are missing one of the most important things. So many families simply do one practical thing. Keep 1 or 2 extra bottles when the price is reasonable. Store them in a cool, dark place and rotate them through regular use. There is no need to buy too much, because oil also has a quality shelf life. But if you use olive oil every week, having 1 extra backup bottle is not panic. It is a way to avoid being forced to buy right when the price is at its highest. Tomorrow's supply is often decided by last year's harvest, and that is not in the shopper's hands. 2. Chocolate. Let's start with a paradox. Chocolate is becoming more expensive, but most people still keep buying it. Why? Because chocolate has never been just food. It is emotion. In recent years, global cocoa prices have gone through periods of rising more than 100%, even reaching record highs at times. Many manufacturers have had to shrink product sizes, adjust formulas, or raise retail prices. And what is worth noticing is that most consumers do not even notice it immediately. They still see the familiar chocolate bar, still see the familiar packaging. But the chocolate bar is smaller, thinner, more expensive, or all three at the same time. This is a very different kind of shortage from what we usually imagine. It does not leave shelves empty. It makes the value of each purchase shrink little by little. The root of the problem is thousands of miles away from the United States. Most of the world's cocoa comes from West Africa, especially Ivory Coast and Ghana. These 2 countries supply most of the world's cocoa. But in recent years, cocoa-growing regions have repeatedly faced crop disease, unstable weather, and declining yields. What worries the market is that you cannot plant a cocoa tree today and harvest it next season. Cocoa trees take years to mature. That means today's problems can continue affecting supply for many years to come. But this is the most interesting part. When people build a pantry, they usually think about calories, rice, beans, pasta, canned meat, things that help the body survive. But people with long experience understand that humans do not live on calories alone. Humans also live on morale. A chocolate bar may not save your life, but it can save a bad day. It can make a stressful evening feel a little easier. It can bring a sense of normalcy during an abnormal period. That is why chocolate often appears in well-built pantries. Not because it is the most essential, but because it reminds people that life still has things to look forward to. Sometimes the greatest value of a food is not in the calories it provides. It is in the feeling it gives. And that is exactly what makes chocolate different from almost every other item on this list. If chocolate prices rise another 20% next year, would you buy less? Or is it still something you would not want to give up? 1. Pure honey. Let's start with a thought-provoking truth. In recent years, beekeepers in the United States have repeatedly reported colony losses, reaching dozens of % after each season. when the creature that makes honey begins to weaken, the real supply of honey cannot continue to be as abundant as before. But what is worth noticing is not the price. What is worth noticing is the value. Honey is one of the very few foods in the world that almost has no expiration date if stored properly. Not in advertising language, in science. Archaeologists have found honey in ancient Egyptian tombs. After thousands of years, it was still usable. Think about that for a moment. While many foods are becoming more expensive, more perishable, or more dependent on complex supply chains, honey remains one of the few items that almost stands outside the game of time. So why does it appear so high on this list? The answer lies with bees. For many years, bee colonies in the United States and many other parts of the world have been under constant pressure from habitat loss, parasites, pesticides, and extreme weather. Fewer bees means less honey. Domestic supply is affected, while demand for pure honey continues to rise. And there is another pressure quietly taking place. Imported honey is being inspected more strictly, especially blended products or products with unclear origins. That is good for market quality, but it also makes real, clean, trustworthy honey harder to buy in large quantities. This is why many people only see a jar of honey on the shelf, while experienced people see something completely different. They see energy, they see flavor, they see a food that can last for many years without electricity, without freezing, and without complicated storage conditions. For many people over 50, honey also carries a very personal value. A spoonful of honey can make tea feel warmer, oats easier to eat, and a simple meal more comforting. During difficult periods, what helps people maintain their morale is sometimes not only calories. It is also familiar things that bring a sense of normalcy. That is why honey is not at the top of the list, because it is disappearing. It is at the top because it is one of the most durable foods we still have. There is no need to buy as if the shelves will be empty tomorrow. But if you find pure honey, with a clear source and a reasonable price, keeping 1 or 2 extra jars is absolutely worth considering. Because sometimes the greatest value of a food is not in using it today. It is in the fact that many years later, when so many things have changed, it is still there. The interesting thing about these 9 foods is that none of them are truly rare right now. You can still find them. You can still buy them. And that is exactly what makes them worth paying attention to. Because shortages rarely begin with completely empty shelves. They begin with higher prices, smaller sizes, more unpredictable supply, and small changes that most people ignore. Beef, coffee, rice, frozen vegetables, canned seafood, processed tomatoes, olive oil, chocolate, and honey all tell different stories, but they all lead to the same lesson. The people in the best position are usually not the ones who react after the problem has appeared, but the ones who recognize the signals while everything still looks normal. Of these items, which one has risen in price the fastest where you live? Share your city and state in the comments.